G'day guys, thought I'd make a quick video showing the process I'm going through building and painting one of my favourite Warhammer Fantasy models, the Marienburg Landship. From the final years of Warhammer Fantasy, this was a Forge World piece that was released alongside the campaign book Tamur Khan, where we also got the Chaos Dwarves range from Forge World and a couple of Empire pieces such as Elspeth von Draken and the Null regiments. Marienburg Landship was the most impressive of them all though. This thing is essentially a steam tank boiler built into the back of an Age of Sail Spanish galleon. That boiler turns a great big paddle wheel and drives this thing around the battlefield, crushing your opponents and firing off broadsides of cannons at them while the crew take pot shots. Now the model itself, all Forge World resin, one of the biggest and most complicated pieces that they ever produced. The main body of the ship itself mercifully comes in two separate halves that fit together in the middle. As with any resin model, the pieces can come out a little bit warped or bent. I've already gone through the process with this of heating and bending and cutting and getting everything to fit more like it should. I've also put a couple of pins in, one at the back and two at the front. And the reason for this is so that it allows me to dry fit where the bits are going to click together. And the reason why we want to get this dry fitted before we start gluing is that there are a couple of pieces that go into the midsection here, a lower deck floor essentially, as well as the boiler components, that you have to get these lined up and organized before you glue everything together, because once the pieces are together you won't be able to get it down inside, especially not lined up and correctly positioned. Even after bending and fitting this, it's still a bit of a nightmare to try and get everything to come together without leaving a gap. So prepare yourself to have a couple of runs at this, line everything up with the pieces put in, trim them down, see how it fits, check again. There are further components as well that click down into this lower deck. That hole in the middle is for the mast, so while you're at this stage you can check all of those other bits and pieces, make sure that they go on. I've also done a little bit of gap filling with green stuff at this stage, where you can put the green stuff on the edge that's going to marry up and wet it so that it doesn't stick, and then press it into the other side to make a bit of a mold so that the glue can stick easier. Now this middle piece is an example of the bending and warping I was talking about in the casting process. You can see there's a bit of a banana bend to this still, even after I've already heated it and flattened it out. Sometimes you just can't ever get them to be completely flat and straight, especially with things like sword blades and spear shafts. They're too spindly, they're too prone to bending. This one I'm not too fussed about because it has a groove that it has to fit into, and if I flex it a little bit, it fits in. So that's not a worry. Alright, so I'll tell you a little bit about the base that I'm putting this on as well. This model was not sold with a base. I don't think at the time that a lot of large Forge World models were. This one was too big for any of the bases that they made. I believe they did eventually produce a 100 by 150mm square for some of the 8th edition kits, like the Zombie Dragon or the Stonehorn from the Ogre Kingdoms. I didn't have one of those. I did have some chariot bases lying around, which I've glued 3 chariot bases together along the long edge to make a roughly 100 by 150mm base. There is no official base size for this model. Even in fan rules like Warhammer Armies Project, there is no agreed upon official base size. So if I hold a piece of the ship up against the base, you can see that 150mm for the length is about exact. There are a couple of bits that are going to overshoot that. There's a figurehead that sticks out the front of the ship, and there's the engineering deck and the large rear wheels. The figurehead isn't really a problem if it sticks out because it's so high up, it's going to go over the head of most enemy regiments. You're not going to have that situation where your lancers are pushing your opponent's miniatures out of the way and you can't get the two units to actually meet up cleanly in the middle. A bit about the basing style and effect. I've got sand on the top and the bottom, as you can see, and I've built up the edges to do a river or a canal piece going through the middle. These bits are going to get filled up with more sand to represent the desert on the banks of the river. I'm using this landship in my Sudenburg army. Sudenburg is an empire colony on the west coast of the Southlands, at the bottom of where Araby would be on the map. If you think of the real world Earth map, it's roughly where I guess Nigeria might be, but I've chosen a yellow desert basing theme for my army rather than a jungly one for the most part. I'll put some pictures of my models that I've done so far up on the screen for you so you can see what that looks like. Because of that bright sand is why I've chosen to go with a darker, redder wood tone for the ship. I've done Rhinox hide as the base layer, which is a very versatile saturated brown, and then I've done a little bit of a Doomball brown dry brushing highlight on this, which is a chestnutty orangey brown color, and we're going to be more towards that for the final effect. I'm also going to do a dark steel gunmetal type of color for the boiler and some bright copper on the piping just to break up that metal section because it is fairly large. So to finish up talking about the base, we'll have desert on the sides, river up the middle, and I found this crocodile dragon looking head in an ogre kit that I'm going to have that bobbing up over the surface of the water and maybe have some spikes or its tail visible going behind it, giving this whole thing a bit of a cruise down the Nile feel on a barge. We'll do a little bit of painting now. You can see that I've already primed and started doing the base coats on a number of these wood pieces. I'm not a masterclass painter, but I'm a pretty quick painter, and so don't be horrified by what you're about to see if you're not already horrified by my messy painting desk. I've got this old pot of Rhinox hide that I'm about to replace. Don't worry, I've got another one ready to go. And I'm just going to slather a moderately thinned layer of this onto all of the wood and riveted sections just to get some paint into all of the crevices and cracks. This model is almost entirely wood grain, patterned, and rivets, and those are some of the hardest areas to get paint to go in. If you haven't done a resin model like this before, the mold release agent means that paint doesn't really stick to it very well. Even if you wash it and scrub it like I've done, there are always going to be some spots where the primer doesn't stick, the paint doesn't stick, it just bounces off like a waterproof windshield. So, bit thicker paint than one would normally do, and a bit messier with this old brush, just so that I can get all of those shadows filled in with a base layer that's going to stick. So I'll finish off doing all of these bits with the Rhinox hide and maybe a dry brush of the Doomball brown, and then we'll come back and take a look at the metal areas. Chestnut brown layer all done now, and applying the Iron Warriors base layer to the metallic parts of the boiler and the wheels that drive the ship. Those round sections, the lugs that I'm painting on now, that's where the gears will go on, and then the wheels on top of that. Now I'm using an old ratty brush, normally do for metallics as much as I can because metallics ruin your brush, but this section has a lot of really deep recesses and it's hard to push the paint in. With a fine tip brush, you're just going to end up smushing the tip and ruining it. So just trying to get some base coat down into every little section. We're going to be putting a lot of oil and grime and weathering and sand and stuff over this bit of the ship, which will probably fill in all of those gaps later over the top of the base coat. Okay, there are a couple of different bronzy colours that are going to be involved for the cannon and the chimney and a couple of other bits like the base of the mast. I'm going to use Warplock Bronze as the base. These are a bit more weathered and in everyday use. They're not going to be as polished and bright, and this is a nice dark bronze colour to start with for these. I'm going to add a little bit of Balthazar gold in to do a highlight on that, and a little bit of silver for the final glints and gleams of light. And for the bright copper pipes, I'm going to start by painting those with a layer of red, and the reason for that is Balthazar gold, which is my copper base, doesn't have that good coverage, and so a red base underneath will mean that it shows up nice and bright and saturated when the copper goes on. And you can see some of that copper there. Final step for this stage, I'm going to give all of the metal parts a wash, get them nice and shaded up and separated from the wood. I'll probably work on the wood next. I'll come back and highlight the metals again when I'm going through and picking out all of the rivets on the ship body, which is going to take a long time, but will be very rewarding when it's done. So I'll see you next time for more progress on the Marienburg Landship. I'll link to a page on my website that has all of the progress so far. Thanks for watching.